Welcome to video 2 of our cognition memory unit. This video is going to be on encoding. And basically encoding is simply the process of how we get stuff into our memory. That's a non-technical definition of it. There's, how do we get that new information into our memory in a way that can be processed and used? So processing of information into the memory system. As we discussed in our last unit, this can happen automatically, and typically we unconsciously process information about space and spatial relationships. So if I were to ask you how to get from wherever you are right now to MacArthur Mall, many of you will be able to kind of picture that and think about how you would get there. It wasn't because you studied it. It wasn't because you looked at a map and kind of memorized the routes. It's just because your brain processes that information automatically as you're exposed to it over and over again. It processes information about time, especially how things relate to each other in time and what happened first in kind of consecutive order. How frequently something happened. How often did you see your best friend yesterday? Your brain just kind of automatically processes that. And then well-learned information as well. And it's important to remember that information that is new and that you're just learning and that requires a lot of effort can over time start to become that kind of automatic information as well. So for example, if you've ever watched a young child learn how to walk, that is a very effortful process. Every step takes this conscious thinking of what am I doing and how do I stay balanced. And then over time, of course, they learn to do it better and better. They fall, they get up, they keep doing it better. And then you turn around and they're running around in your backyard and it's not no effort at all. It has become an automatic process thing. Same thing if you've ever had a younger sibling that is learning how to read for the first time. And you'll notice how slowly they read words. And when they read to you, oh, it's so frustrating. You just want to read it to them because it's taking them so long to read the words. But of course, you need to let them practice and get used to it because what is very effortful for them right now over time will become this kind of automatic processed information. So with effortful processing, think of effortful processing and how you process information in school. This is information that that your brain is not really built to process very easily. And so therefore it must be rehearsed through conscious repetition. And we must activate some sort of meaning with it. And so Ebbinghaus was an early researcher in the field of psychology, late 1800s, and he wanted to see, what happens with information as we're learning it for the first time. So he basically developed these nonsense syllables, and he memorized the list of these syllables. Then he wanted to test how much information do I retain over time. And if you look at this curve, what you see, of course, is after an initial learning, there is a steep decline in what you're able to remember. I mean, look what's happened by the second day. You've forgotten most of it. And by the fifth day, certainly, you're about down to 20%. And I don't know what most of your classes are like, but certainly in AP Psychology, remembering 20% is not going to cut it. And so you have to do something different than just learning something one time and hoping that it somehow just sticks. And so the principle that's really established here with Ebbinghaus's learning curve is that the amount remembered really depends on the amount of time you spend learning it. So in the not shocking headline of all time, learning information and learning it to do well on tests and learning it to be able to apply it in your everyday life, it actually requires time and effort. And you have to exert that time and effort if you want to do well. So this unit really, this principles of encoding really leads us to some ideas that are very useful in how you should organize how you study. One of the principles is the idea called overlearning. The idea that if you study and know you understand it and then study some more even past and beyond that, it's going to increase retention. It is not a waste of time. And so you should study information until it really feels like it's becoming automatic, that you barely have to consciously think of it. And you're able to process that information. The spacing effect, such a well-established effect in research. The idea that the farther apart you can space your studying time, the better that is for retention. So let's imagine that we're going to say we're going to study for 15 hours for the AP exam, which is in May. And you had a choice of spreading those 15 hours over a long period of time, say from October 1st all the way through May, or you're going to spread those 15 hours over the 15 days right prior to the AP test. Some students might say, hey, I should do those 15 hours in the 15 days prior to the AP test because that's closer to the date and it'll help me remember that information. Research suggests that that is just false, that what would really help you is to spread this out as much as possible and spread those 15 hours out over time from October 1st on would really help in retention. The way you study matters as well. The testing effect is established by this. Testing isn't just a good way of knowing what you know and don't know. Testing happens to be an excellent way of actually learning and remembering that information. And so you can juxtapose this to a tried and true study habit of just looking over my notes. Looking over your notes almost never accomplishes what you want to accomplish because we trick ourselves. We see keywords and in our brain it triggers a familiarity and we're like, oh yeah, I know that. But in reality, you don't know it and you don't know it well enough to do well on the test. You have to set up a system, a process of quizzing yourself and testing yourself, whether it be through flashcards, whether it be from friends that are in the class asking you to explain a concept, whether it be setting up your notes in kind of a Cornell note style, which you can kind of be easily test yourself that way instead of just rereading over the notes. All those would be examples of how you could apply the testing effect. The last effect probably doesn't apply to studying quite as well, and that's something called the serial position effect. And that is if your mom or dad gave you a 15-item grocery list and they said it to you and you're like, oh, I don't need anything to write it down with, I'll remember it. Which items are you most likely to remember? And it turns out you are most likely to remember items at the beginning of the list, and that's called the primacy effect, and at the end of the list, and that's called the recency effect. And the theory goes that the reason we remember information at the beginning of the list is because we have had more time to rehearse that information and therefore more time to get that into our long-term memory. The reason why I remember information at the end of the list is because it's still kicking around in our active conscious memory, and so we're able to remember that. So if you were to test someone an hour later, the primacy effect tends to be stronger than the recency effect because it's more based on recall just than based on what was kicking around in your brain at that time. So there are various types of encoding. There's visual encoding, which is going to be the encoding of imagery, and this can help you with studying as well. The more you can kind of create mental pictures of what you're studying, the better off you are. You can use mnemonics, which are memory aids, which often involve vivid imagery and organizational devices that process information visually. There's acoustic encoding, processing of sound, especially words. And sometimes you can use that with studying by kind of creating songs and that type of thing. And then there's semantic encoding. Semantic encoding is really processing the meaning of what you're studying and learning. And that results in the greatest retention of information. So as you're making those flashcards and studying those vocabulary terms, it might be well and good to just study directly whatever the book definition is, but it would be even better to take that book definition, turn it into your own definition, and start to remember what that is, because it means that you were able to grasp the actual meaning of what you're learning rather than just regurgitating a set definition. You can also organize information in a way that makes it more likely that the information will be encoded. Chunking is one way of doing that. We talked about in our last video that working memory is a limited capacity, 5 to 9 items. Chunking is a way of really expanding that capacity. So if you think about a new reader, as they're processing information, they are processing information often not even word by word, but letter by letter as they're sounding things out. When we read, we chunk things together. We don't read by letter. We often don't even read word by word. We actually often read sentence or sometimes sentences by sentences. Our brain is able to chunk that information together, and so therefore hold more than just that kind of 5 to 9 letters, certainly in our brain. The use of mnemonic devices can certainly help to organize information for encoding, such as the Roy G. Biv, a mnemonic device at the bottom, something that most of us, it makes it very easy for us to remember the exact correct order of the colors of the rainbow. And then, of course, you can organize information into hierarchies as well. The more you know a topic, the better you're able to organize it into hierarchies. So if I were to ask you, if you're a football fan, and I asked you to name all 32 NFL teams, you could just kind of go through and try to remember just off the top of your head, or you can start to organize it into conferences and divisions and kind of break the teams down that way. And it helps you to keep track of what you've already recalled and what teams you need to recall as you go through the list. All right, that is it for encoding. Again, encoding is simply getting the stuff into your memory. If you have any questions about today's video, you can always email me at ghsteacher@gmail.com, or you can ask your questions in class. Otherwise, good night.